The penultimate college football playoff rankings are in, and here's how it looks. No change at the top. Georgia, your number 1, 12-0. The number 2 team in the land, an undefeated Michigan. The number 3 team, an undefeated Washington. Florida State standing pat, 12-0 after their win a week ago. Headed for that ACC title game. Gets interesting when you look 5, 6, 7, 8. Oregon, who will face off with Washington, heavy favorites in that Pac-12 title game. Maybe a de facto quarterfinal matchup, if you will. Ohio State sliding to 6 following that loss to Michigan. The road back in seems steep. Texas also going to be in action on conference championship weekend as they sit at 11-1 with that win over number 8 Alabama. Bama will get their hand at number 1 Georgia in the SEC title game. Two of the finest minds in college ball here to break it all down, maybe read between the lines and the numbers in this one. Jerry Palm, Dennis Dodd joining us now, guys. No surprise at number 1, but that's where we will start. Georgia still sitting atop the rankings, undefeated as it goes. Did you read into this at all? I mean, there was maybe a scenario with the win over Ohio State that Michigan moved to 1. I'm going to go first word here to you, Dennis. Sitting at number 1, do you read anything into Georgia and that safety net that lies there in the case of a loss to Alabama?
I don't know about a safety net, but I expected them to be number 1. Michigan's overall schedule doesn't even compare much to Georgia's. Georgia's being a couple of ranked teams, actually 3 ranked teams in a row before Georgia Tech. So I fully expected that. Michigan played one of its best games of the year, probably its best game of the year. But it is what it is. You've got these 4 at the top. We move on. I should hasten to mention before we move on, this has never happened before in the history of the CFP. 4 unbeaten teams at the top, and I know we're going to get into it. That's going to cause all kinds of chaos if there's losses.
Pretty cut and dry when you're looking at 4 undefeateds. If we're still looking at that come Selection Day on Sunday, Jerry, it is going to be as cut and dry, but that might not be the scenario. When you take a look at this top 4, maybe let's say top 8, the first thing that comes to mind for you is what?
Yeah, well, first of all, I never thought Michigan was going to pass Georgia. Georgia is a team that this committee has really liked in recent weeks, and Michigan's schedule, like Dennis said, just didn't get up to snuff. But you know, these rankings are kind of a placeholder. You know, everybody gets excited because they think of it as like a poll, and you know, if you know, Alabama beats Georgia, you know, that means that they could both get in, when it's really more likely that neither get in. It's all of these scenarios that can play out here. It's much more fun to look at this year than say last year when there were really only 5 teams in play. There's a lot of different things that can happen. The one thing that stands out to me is that the Pac-12 champion is in. Nobody else is guaranteed anything, but the Pac-12 champion is going to be at least 4.
Let's talk about 6 through 8 right now, because as I'm looking at it, in the instance of some calamity here throughout the weekend, and we do get Oregon over Washington, Florida State slips up, and you need to fill those 2 positions. 5 and 6. Most notably would likely move in here, that being Oregon and Ohio State. The fact that Ohio State does not drop below a Texas or an Alabama tells you what, Jerry?
Nothing, because we don't have any conference champions yet. We don't have any 12-1 teams yet, or 13-0 teams. Ohio State is not safe where they are. They will get jumped by Texas if Texas wins. They will get jumped by Alabama if Alabama wins. They're just not safe. Ohio State is the only team in the top 8 who cannot help themselves this weekend, and therefore they're at the mercy of everyone else. And their chances of making the college football playoff, whether they were 5 or 6 today, are really pretty slim. They're going to need a fair amount of help because they can't help themselves.
Well, if they are slim at 6, 7, and 8 should be slim as well, but those will be 2 teams playing in conference title games, Dennis. As you look at Texas, Alabama, again, some craziness would have to ensue to get those 2 teams on the inside. Did you see this as the rightful situation of 6 through 8?
Yeah, I don't know where else you're going to put these teams right now. Obviously, Washington beat Oregon. You got to slot them. There's only 4 undefeateds. Oregon is sitting there at 6. Texas remains at 7 with the head-to-head over Alabama. Interesting note here, Joe. If any of those teams get into the top 4, it'd be very interesting. The farthest back a team has come in the final rankings has been from number 6 into the top 4. And that happened in 2017 with Georgia and 2019 with Oklahoma. So if Oregon wins and gets in, they would tie that. it'd be something for Texas and Alabama to get in. I think there's definitely a path for both, but you've got that really intriguing head-to-head sitting out there, and they need some help themselves getting in there. But that would be a record. If either Texas or Alabama get in, they'd be coming from farthest off the pace to get into the playoff.
Jerry, I want to talk to you about Florida State here for a moment, because we have seen the committee in the past downgrade due to injury. Not the case here. An undefeated team heading into their conference title game. The case for Florida State is pretty clear. Win, and it's no problem. In the case of a loss sitting there at number 4, obviously we move them out. Do you take any exception, or are you surprised at all with the way that Florida State was treated here due to the quarterback situation and the injury that was incurred?
No, because they're still winning. You know, they've proven that they can win with their backup quarterback. And if they prove it one more time, then they deserve to be in the top 4. So, no, I don't have a problem with it. I don't remember a case specifically where the committee has taken a team and a team that won and downgraded them because of an injury. As long as Florida State keeps winning, and by the way, I mean, Oregon's had the best win of these rivalry games. They destroyed Oregon State, a team in the rankings. You look at the other teams in this top 8 in their rivalry games, Florida State was the second best performance in a rivalry game, although all of them struggled at some level. Alabama needed divine intervention to win. So, you know, Florida State is doing fine. And if they win, if they beat Louisville, a team in the middle of the rankings, then they absolutely deserve to be in the top 4. And, you know, what they do with it once they get there, we'll find out. But they haven't shown that they can't win with their backup quarterback. So until that happens, you have to take them as what they've done.
It's pretty cut and dry. You got a 0 next to that number in the loss column, and you should be right there. I don't argue with that at all, but for the sake of this thought experiment that we might see following this weekend, I do want to talk to Dennis here about Alabama, because we're not talking about Coastal Carolina. Heck, we're not talking about TCU. We're talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide and head coach, maybe the greatest of all time in the sport, Nick Saban. This is an interesting scenario. Can you walk me through the road into the top 4 for Alabama?
Well, they have to win and, you know, hope that Texas loses, because it's going to be a conundrum if Texas wins and certain things happen at the top, because they've got the head-to-head, and I keep referring back to the committee's protocol. Number 1 is championships won. They'd be tied there. Schedule strength, they'd be virtually tied there. I looked it up today on Sports Source Analytics. Texas 4, Alabama's 23. They're going to kind of meet in the middle, because of the teams they play. And then the third, not a tiebreaker, but a protocol, is head-to-head. And I keep reminding people, this was September 9th. You can't just pretend like that game didn't happen. It doesn't matter if it was September 9th or November 9th. That Texas walked into Bryant-Denny and dealt Alabama its worst non-conference loss since 2004. Double digits, held the ball for the last 7-14. Alabama didn't see the ball for the last half of the fourth quarter, and made Jalen Milroe, you know, probably played his worst game of the season. Now we're talking about him as a Heisman candidate. Those are things that should enter the mind of the selection committee. It really gets hairy if Oregon wins, if Texas wins, and Alabama wins in a close one against Georgia. You've got Georgia sitting out there. They all have 12 on their records. Georgia would be out, I think, because it didn't win its conference. But how do you break the tie between those 3? I think you got to leave out Oregon in that scenario. And then it comes down to that, what I just described as those protocol issues as to whether they value that head-to-head result when the margins are so close elsewhere.
We know that the committee does not sit, watch, and root, but it gets increasingly harder if that 4 does not stand pat. And I will point out all 4 of those teams, minus Washington, favorites in their matchups heading into this weekend. Florida State, a short favorite, I believe 2.5 is the number there. Washington giving 9.5 thereabouts to Oregon. So it's going to be fun to watch it all play out. And gentlemen, we will have thoughts from you, I'm sure, on Sunday. But as it stands right now, we do need a final prediction. We've done it each and every Tuesday. JP, I'm leading off with you here. How do those chips fall when the dust settles?
I have Georgia, Michigan, Florida State all winning, and then Oregon winning the Pac-12 and coming into the 4th spot in the college football playoff.
Dennis?
I've got Oregon at number 4. I've got Texas at 3, both winning their conference, obviously. Florida State winning out, and then Michigan winning out. I just described the scenario I just said in the last segment about what happens to Alabama and Georgia. It's more likely, if Alabama beats Georgia, that the SEC doesn't get in, then they get 2 in. And I don't think they'll get any in that scenario. So Michigan, Florida State, Texas, Oregon. First time since 2005 the SEC would be left out of the championship scenario.
Mutual destruction this weekend on CBS, says Dennis Dodd. Fellas, we appreciate the insight as always. All right, here's a look at those odds to make the college football playoff. You just heard the experts. Here's what the odds makers believe. I mean, Michigan, they're in. They're giving 23.5 to Iowa, a team who sits at a 6.5-point team total. Nothing expected from the Hawkeyes. Michigan, the most favorite, the shortest odds, that is, to be in. Georgia sitting right there next to them, minus 520. So the books think no issue with Bama. Oregon and Florida State rounding out the expected top four according to FanDuel.